Good morning, everybody. Hi. Welcome back to day 2 of the conference. It's really nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones in the crowd. I hope that everyone who came yesterday, if you went to the SSP drinks afterwards, you had a good time and enjoyed the Oxford sunshine and maybe swung by and saw the red postbox on Banbury Road that Sarah was talking about yesterday. So, yes, I hope you had a good evening after the conference. We're in for some excellent sessions again today. There is a small change that you should have been emailed about on the programme. So rather than us running the parallel sessions and you having a choice and those running twice, we're just going to run them back to back here in the same room. So everything is in here today. The programme online has been updated to reflect that, but yes, it should make things nice and easy for everybody. Some very quick housekeeping. At the end of the day, if you have luggage, don't forget to take it with you, so you don't want anything left behind. If you could leave your lanyards at the front desk as you leave, that would be great, because then we can reuse those again. And a small reminder that at the end of the conference, if you have any feedback, please do leave it. We'll be sending an email around, so please do share your thoughts, because it's really useful for us to help build future conferences. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Tom for the first session of the day. Thank you.
Oh, that's a bit beardy. Right. Okay, hello everyone. So this is about scale, and it's to introduce large publishers and small publishers and how they operate in our market. I'm just going to give you a short preamble, just to sort of key things up, and then I'll introduce the panel, who I'm sure are familiar. So scale is about reach, resources, and I'm going to read it as well. Scale is about reach, resources, and content usefulness. Ensuring enough of the right content can be accessed and paid for is a mammoth task. So how do we generate the resources sufficient to work in this climate when we're of different sizes? What can be done for the publishers then of limited means to succeed, of which there are many in the room? So let's consider one aspect of being a small press. I mean, this is as much in the room as it is for the panel to answer. It's about challenging ourselves to think collaboratively, to focus on those technological leaps and the advantages of AI in prospecting those new developments. So on the flip side, small is inevitably beautiful, right? We all are, right? Full of supportive instincts, clubs, collaborations, and independent resilience, respected by the very institutions that seek the big deal all the same. So there's that dichotomy, if you will. Utilising the vital enabling infrastructure that large publishers have already acquired to protect their interests, and how can we draw on that if you're of a small size? So economies of scale matter in open access negotiations particularly, but obviously in terms of reach to authors and the sufficient draw of technology and data. These are complex and resource-hungry negotiations oftentimes for sometimes depressing margins. So should the choice be for a society and independent publishers to be partner with the biggest publishers because they have drawn out a lot of the resources or invested themselves? What is the market pressure that reduce the royalty take to barely above subsistence? How do we battle that? Where are the economies? Where's the margin? So the comment is, if transformative agreements can really affect the whole country's decision-making, are there other modes for small publishers to capture a share of what is a depressingly difficult to extract institutional budgets? But there's always solutions, there's always alternatives. So this panel discussion will explore whether partnerships, going it alone, or examples like the Society's Publishing Coalition signal the start of a move away from reliance on commercial publishers, maybe that level of partnership, or whether the big players' scale means that they remain the most sustainable option for many of the societies. So on the panel today, we have representatives of a large publisher, independent and small, and then independent and small, my words, not theirs, working with a large partner. So you've got a different opinion. So I'd like to introduce Liz Ferguson on the end here, SVP of Wiley's Global Research Publishing Organisation, over 25 years in STM publishing, and defines that publishing strategy push and the 2,000 plus journals involved at Wiley. OA strategy, all the things you'd expect from publishing leadership, operational standards, workflows, and of course ethics and integrity considerations there. She's also involved in a number of the multiple industry bodies I won't list. Sophia Anderton Over 20 years in scholarly publishing as well, currently Chief Exec of BJU International, with overall responsibility for the journals there and online education performance for urologists. Sophia is a director of ALPS as well and chair of the training programme, but also co-chair of the NISO Transfer Committee. And previously, Sophia worked at the British Institute of Radiology as director of publishing. Prior to that, the RSC, not the Shakespeare Company, obviously. And Miriam is Chief Publishing Officer at IOP, overseeing the IOP's publishing strategy and all the teams there involved in editorial production and also author marketing. She leads the organisation's decisions on publishing ethics and integrity and inclusivity, etc., and the best practices around those themes. Miriam would work previously at Wiley, is a member of the STM board there as well now, and a trustee of the new Phytologist Foundation, which I needed to clarify what that was, and serves on Research for Life's Executive Council. So what we're going to kick off with is a few questions that we have posed here, and then, of course, we'll leave time for the room. So if we can start then, folks. These questions should involve topics like data and advocacy, portfolio strategies, all those typical things you'd expect to see in a publishing house, and then the ideas at a small level and also at a large level are quite common, right? The marketplace is the same. So how is the responsiveness of different sizes going to matter, and how do we invest or share investment in technology and data? So with transformative agreements, to Miriam first. These are complex to negotiate and require a large sales team. How important is access to transformative agreements for small and medium-sized publishers?
So speaking for IOP Publishing, my company, Very, we have a very active and growing program of transformative agreements. I'm not sure I agree with the statement that you need a large sales team, but you certainly need a very specialized sales team. So negotiating transformative agreements is complex. I will say that organizations like mine have benefited from the work that sort of Wiley, Springer, the big commercial publishers have done with the library sector, just to sort of set up the frameworks, and we're to a large degree tapping into those. With some variation that sort of reflects the fact that we're a discipline-specific publisher. So the Institute of Physics publishes in physics and the physical sciences more generally. So that gives our transformative agreements a certain flavour. But in terms of transitioning our content to open access, they're absolutely crucial. They were driving open access far faster than what we call APCs in the wild, so open access articles outside of TAs, which are growing but at a much slower rate.
And your reach as an independent publisher in participating those TAs has been compromised in any way by your size?
Not in our case. We I think historically we luckily had quite good reach into the library subscription and licensing market, and we're tapping into that. Again, I think the fact that we are discipline specific gives us an advantage. Mm-hmm. There's a defined market with interest in our content, and we're reasonably well penetrated into that globally and locally.
Okay, thank you. Sophia?
So we're partnered with a commercial publisher, we're with Wiley. So we totally benefit from the Wiley sales team, and it's a huge weight off our shoulders. We don't have to worry about those individual relationships, transactions with universities and libraries, so we can focus on more of the editorial side of the business. We are seeing our open access grow hugely, and the transformative agreements are entirely what's driving it. 90% of our open access content in our hybrid journal came through a transformative agreement last year. So it really is transformative to how our business is working. But being small, we have 2 journals, so we are tiny, and I think we would very much struggle to try and do those kinds of deals if we were independent. There are smaller publishers than IOP who are independent, who are managing to find a way through this new business world. But I'm very thankful to working with a commercial publisher at this stage.
Were there any knotty elements getting to the point of working with Wiley in terms of prevarications, or was it a clear decision?
I mean, we've been with them for years and
Okay.
years, so it's a long-standing partnership.
So, as the owner of such partnerships, in what way does Wiley's perspective, both for the main company, but also for the partners themselves, how does Wiley respond to the smallest of publishers, and how do you think that benefits Wiley?
I think that there's a number of ways in which it benefits us, but in terms of the question of how important is access to TAs for smaller publishers, it's essential. That's where the world is moving. That's what customers want. It's what institutions want, and it's what researchers want. So when we're thinking about how we approach this, we have around 800 society partnerships in total, and we cannot consult with every single partner on every single shape of deal. And it's also important, and everyone in this room will know this, there isn't a single TA. There's multiple models deployed, not just by different publishers having different models, but most of the large publishers also have multiple different models. So we have to think about the overall interests of our society partners, as well as our overall interests as a large player in this, and make sure that the actions that we take are aligned with where the institutions and consortia want to go, but also in those longer term interests of the society partners too. And sometimes there are tensions there, and there may be tensions that differ between the size of the partner, between the subject discipline that they're in as well. And this world actually feels more complex than it has done in quite some time, because geographically the world is moving in very different ways and at different paces as well. So trying to combine all of those things keeps an awful lot of people besides the sales team really busy in terms of what kind of models actually are in the collective long-term interests, and how do we approach each one of those individual negotiations with the customers who are buying into TAs, but also the individual conversations that we're having with societies at any given point in time.
So do you have any capacity issues now if you're taking on so many partners, or is it infinite capacity?
There's no infinite
No, exactly.
and it's I think it's a question in part, Sophia said that BJU International's been with us for many years. That's true of a lot of our partnerships, and I think there's a trust that's built up over time, and it doesn't mean there isn't a challenge and a very active conversation and series of management conversations at different times. But as you're working through this kind of change and complexity, that the level of trust in the relationship becomes really important.
So these would have been established relationships at a sort of ordinary journal level at one point, and then the bells and whistles or the services that you've applied have grown. Do you see that continuing to change and adapt?
Yes. This is... I'm quite fond of saying if publishing was the way it was when I got into it 25-something years ago, I wouldn't still be in it. It's keeping us all on our toes. It's super interesting. But that brings challenges with it as well.
You raised an interesting point about trust, and I think that is at the crux of a lot of these relationship issues. And there are frustrations from being an individual society. We do have to acknowledge that we are one partner of many, and there are some things that I would love to see happen, which in an ideal world, if we had the resources and we could control our own pathway and our own sales and into the particular institutions, would be amazing. But I think it's a case of being realistic, and we have one person who works full-time in journals in our organisation. It's not realistic. So there's some give and takes, but trust is a key thing. And if the trust breaks down, there can be issues. But it's important to work on that trust. Yep.
And the scale, you think, helps overall the Wiley approach?
The scale helps us in terms of, if you look at the way different consortia, for example, approach this, the question of how important is access to TAs for smaller publishers, that's often not driven by the size of publisher, it's driven by the way that consortia want to approach individual arrangements. So an organization like JISC is very much out there talking with publishers of all shapes and sizes and trying to find ways forward. If you look at the situation in Germany, for example, and I know Max Planck does its own thing, but the Deal Consortium as a whole started with Elsevier, Springer and Wiley and has stayed with Elsevier, Springer and Wiley and hasn't diversified beyond that point yet. So scale can matter in terms of those early discussions in the way that Miriam framed it as there were many, many years spent in getting to that agreement with Deal. There are many years spent in getting to those early transformative agreements, full stop. If that helps others in the industry, whether they're partnered with Wiley, Springer, Elsevier, or whether they're remaining independent, if it creates that kind of framework for others to say, well, this piece will work for us, and that piece added to it works better for us as well, then that's good for everybody, I think.
Do you agree, Miriam?
Yes, I think, but at the same time, I think as a sort of medium-sized publisher, we have the flexibility that means that we can, kind of. True, we're not getting it around the deal table, but then there are, looking at the German market, there are other organizations that are there for engagement with not the big three, but the next level down of publisher. So I think the fact that the commercial publishers have really, like I said, really driven the transformative agreement model with libraries in Europe particularly, has then sort of garnered a sort of a more diverse market where we can tap into that. We also have, it's rare, but we have had, and we have currently TAs with individual institutions, again, kind of institutions with particularly large physics program. The scale is there, it's not scale in the way you talk about, but so I think the way I would describe sort of our approach to TAs is that we want to sort of respond to the fact that in many markets that is what the library community expects, but we need to sort of tailor it towards their needs and our needs, and that means it's probably a little bit more flexible in terms of publication caps, in terms of how much emphasis you put on the read versus the publish component of it. So it's a very, very diverse range of models.
And the fact that the larger players got in sooner, there's been no obvious restriction in terms of what you can bid for.
Yes, of course, yeah. I think it is my observation is, or the sales team's observation is that there is and that's always been the case, even in the licensing day, that there is a hierarchy. Kind of you go to the biggest players first, because there you get the most content or service for your money, and then you work your way down. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 3 to 5 years, because I think the library market in the UK, certainly in the US, is moving into a period of crisis, and I don't know right now what that means for organizations of my size, but I imagine there will be interesting discussions. Interesting discussions ahead. Yeah.
I'll just comment that a little while ago was with De Gruyter, and they are being based in Germany and have a science program, but also a big humanities program. Their negotiations, because of the long-standing, established, quite German starting points for some of the humanities content, did enable them to have, I think, rich discussions within Germany, even though the Wiley, Elsevier, Springer deals were in place, because of that familiarity with the market. And I think some of you are aware, because I'm in a different place with a smaller publisher. Again, I'm just flagging the humanities side of things, even though I'm a science person, because it's not really flagged part of our discussion. But that move that they made to host content in terms of enabling smaller publishers to reach markets was an interesting fit, and I'm now participating in that from the other side. So I'm not advocating it particularly because I've got to be quite balanced, but it's just another example that's out there where it's not just through that sales scale, but it's also through functional scale. So if I may build on the technology side, because that's a big aspect of scale. So a lot of the publishers have invested, have just had deep pockets, as I say. So the market consolidation of the commercial publishers of core infrastructure, do we feel that trend will continue? I mean, how much more data services and technology services will publishers choose to do? I mean, Elsevier now, I think, rates its data and technology teams much higher than half the content teams. I'm not going to quote anybody, but I'm sure that the dominance of sort of what urology and other subjects meant at Elsevier has now been altered in terms of its visibility toward this technology data space. So if I could start with you, Liz, on will publishers like Wiley continue to develop that investment and also homegrown technology investment?
I think the answer to that is undoubtedly yes.
It's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it comes from several places. There was an interesting line in the abstract for this session which said something like publishers are increasingly acquiring or developing infrastructure to protect their own interests. And I actually don't think it's about protecting interests. Okay. I think it's about recognizing that technology and expectations of authors, whether it's in publishing in all sorts of forms, is changing very rapidly, and the infrastructure that we've all come to rely on of old is no longer fit for purpose. And that there's actually some really interesting organizations out there making some very creative and interesting developments in our space that once you see that seed in them, become very nice add-ons to what we can all do and therefore deliver at scale. So we have invested in multiple pieces of technical infrastructure, both by acquiring like Atapon and through investing in developing our own capabilities on top of that as well. From our perspective, I think being able to provide those services, but from the background of a publisher who has a sense of what publishers need, is a different kind of level of service than a pure technology provider might be able to deliver. I absolutely see that trend continuing. We can see Molecular Connections making multiple acquisitions at the moment. KGL are in this space as well, all sorts of others. Yeah. Do
you think when Atapon was bought, was it purely an acquisitive instinct, or it was because it came with a lot of customers, which of course gave some of those customers food for thought when they said a competitor has bought a supplier? But has that dissipated these days?
It has a little bit. So there were multiple reasons for the acquisition of Atapon. Some of it was to get control over our own technology. Some of it was the provision of services to other publishers. We were very clear at the time that there was a firewall between Wiley staff and the data that flowed through Atapon. In fact, there wasn't only a firewall. Those of you who might have visited our offices in Oxford will have seen actual physical walls and separate badges required to gain entry to the Atapon area and that kind of thing. I think it goes back to this trust thing again. Over time, I believe that the partners, the other publishers that work with us through Atapon, trust that actually we're not doing anything with that data because we're all busy enough with the day jobs, and there's no desire to go playing in that kind of sandpit anyway. There's an honesty and an integrity around publishers and publishing that applies to all of that.
Okay, Sophia, do you agree?
Yes and no. I think having access to infrastructure and at scale, it makes it much cheaper, it makes it much more efficient. Things can happen for us. Again, I said we have one member of staff, couldn't do everything. So it is very advantageous to be part of a machine that is working very effectively. It does sometimes come with frustrations that we see ourselves as individual societies with our own communities, our own needs, our own identities, our own quirks, and sometimes those quirks fit better or less well within a standard infrastructure model. And I think that's sometimes is what leads to some of the biggest frustrations that we see, and I know other smaller partner societies see. So as I say, it comes with some advantages, but also some disadvantages. One size doesn't always fit all, and I think there needs to be acknowledgement of flexibility sometimes, that we do have our own identities, our own communities. And there are sometimes things that are common within a community of not just of journals that from one society, but say a subject area, that something is the norm within that subject area. And those journals will be published by multiple different publishers. And so having something that is a particular, say it's an Elsevier model or a TNF model or whatever publisher you're talking about, it can sometimes lead to frustrations that you can't have the individuality that as a small society publisher we would like.
And as a follow-up, do you have any contingencies at all? Do you have any resources to have any contingencies? Because if we're entering a digital world, we are inherently in a digital business, even though, I mean, we do 60% print still, but this is like unfathomable. But, yeah.
So you mean contingencies of sort of going to other options and... Journal contracts are for a certain number of years, and societies look around different publishers to see what different publishers can offer. And I think actually that's a really great opportunity for the larger publishers to have to fight for business every 5 or 6 years or however often it comes round, and listen to the partners and not just assume that, this is how we do it, we're always going to do it like this, you're stuck with us. Societies have the option to move publishers, and they do, and that actually leads to another one of my hats of co-chair of the NISO Transfer Committee. So that is putting together the international guidelines for best practice of journals moving between publishers. And one thing that concerns me is that when commercial publishers are acquiring or building their own infrastructure, that may lead to locking in of societies into certain publishers, and I'm very keen to understand that there is still the ability to move and transfer freely without loss of data, information, identity, whatever it comes with. And actually, I think these growing bespoke infrastructures are potential barriers to being able to have choice to move if it's not done in the right way. And so sometimes these customer-neutral infrastructure services can be perhaps a little bit more attractive, because you could work with a submission system and transfer it between publishers if you do choose to move.
Oh, that's a fascinating point. I think most people here have, well, at least if you're a smaller publisher, have moved partners, and sometimes, I'll say it, disinterest of the exiting publisher toward the open arms of the new partner is slow, turgid and difficult, and it would be great if the trust was in the room that stuff was enabled. Yeah, so that's a fascinating point. Miriam, when it comes to going independent with tech then, how's that going?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the technology space for us and for other organizations of our size, just to put a little bit of context, so IOP Publishing, we publish about 100 journals and we have about 500 employees. So that's a sort of the scale with which we work. The technology approach is changing, partly due to the recognition that that scale is often not enough to keep up. Just to the areas like cybersecurity, I mean, that is growing a lot. And
as a concern? As
a concern, and as a sort of an area where you need expertise, resources that sort of goes beyond what is easy for us to master. So we have some proprietary technology still, so we have our own platform. That is I will say that is a historic decision. And increasingly, we are now looking to partner for our technology. So we, and I can't say that it's entirely clear what will be the dominant model in the future. We have worked with a number of startups. Like Liz said, there are many companies in our space that come with very specific services looking at a sort of specific niche. And the advantage of that is that unlike working with a with a larger commercial publisher, we do have a certain amount of control. We do have a certain amount of agency. The products can be tailored towards what we need within reason and price range, but there's more flexibility than Sophia was suggesting you get with the larger commercial publishers. But it also comes with risks. I mean, those smaller organizations get sold, sometimes to a large publishing partner, sometimes to somebody else. That then brings uncertainty. That then brings sort of, it's then kind of harder work to keep projects going, to make sure the service is right. So it's a very intense space, I would say, at the moment. And what my ideal scenario would be if there was more sort of collaboration across the industry and maybe across the sort of the smaller and medium players in this space, so recognizing that we all have very similar technology needs, and that we would all struggle individually to replicate those. So things like the FTM Integrity Hub is something I see as very positive, because it kind of brings players together across the sector to address pain points that we all share and that we can't really solve as individuals. So I would love to see more of that. I think for organizations in my space, that would be immensely helpful.
Just thank you. So to Miriam and Sophia, when it comes to the sort of the use cases that I suppose the larger publisher, who is a tech firm, but also some of the tech firm, there's many, so to say, startups and consultants, the use cases they put forward, either as a partner or that you can shop around for, do you find they are, how closely do they regularly suit your strategy? I mean, because is it what's being sold can be a challenge to what you want to do, and then the visibility of what you want to do actually gets done in that technological space, or is it lost?
That's a really good question, and I'm not entirely sure I have a straight answer for that. It really depends. So the two big infrastructure areas are dissemination platform, content platform, and submission and peer review system. Yes. I think for dissemination platform, I think there's a sort of there's a table stake scenario now that everybody accepts, and there isn't a huge amount of variation between the players now, and there isn't actually differentiation will not necessarily give you enormous competitive advantage anymore. That I would argue that was maybe different 10, 15 years ago, but now it's sort of the platform space, I think, is getting, it's more straightforward to just go and say, well, we'd like you to host our content on your platform. Submission and peer review is way more complicated, and there are, Sophia mentioned, sort of discipline-specific practices and workflows. There are sort of publisher-specific editorial models. There are journal-specific approaches to, kind of the way you deal with different article types. So there it's quite hard to just buy off the shelf, I would say. That's quite. We looked into that and spent a very intense period looking at sort of your at the time common off the shelf models, and there were quite a lot of compromises with all of those.
Yeah. Thank you. It's fine. Just as to whether there is, working with Wiley, or obviously you're independent enough to look abroad, are there any gaps in what you see is put forward to what you would like to deliver for your authors and editors?
I think so, yes, because we do have to fit into the model that it comes with the contract, and there are definitely limitations. It does sometimes feel a bit like a one-size-fits-all, but actually the way around that is to have the good communication with your partners. We have regular meetings, we talk about things, we have ideas, we share those, and actually lots of the ideas we have come up with over the years have then been implemented. So it is it is about a relationship, about a partnership, and that's what's really important. But also, we don't have to do things that just come with our partner publisher. So we do have a few things that we have our own relationships with organisations. And I think knowing that we have the freedom to do those things in collaboration with our partner has been useful. So, for example, we work with another company that does plain language summaries for us, and we worked with our partner to get the data through to that third-party company, and that's the thing that we've chosen to do ourselves, because there was a gap in what we thought the offering that we were getting was, but we saw an opportunity to do it ourselves. There are sometimes when we can do that, sometimes when we can't do that. And yes, there are sometimes frustrations, but also there are an awful lot of advantages of working with a partner, because we can't do it all ourselves.
I haven't got the resources all the time, yeah. Let's just move back, if we can, to transformative agreements, given how powerful and influential they are. So with an agreement in place, small publishers don't always have a TA in place, or if they are in place with a player that is in the right subject space or not, you can not always have that. You can lose the authors because of the way that TAs are set up to keep authors connected to those with TAs or not. So, in terms of the competitors and authors' choice, if I start with you, Liz, I mean, you're probably doing pretty well, given scale and competition for authors, but also, have you had any feedback that authors themselves don't like to be sort of stuck in these deals?
We haven't had any feedback that authors don't like it, but equally I have yet to see evidence that authors are choosing where they wish to publish solely on the basis that a TA exists or does not exist. I think most authors, there are exceptions, obviously, if you're required by your funder to publish in a certain way, and the journals that your medium-sized society publisher is not able to get into that market or whatever, then that creates tension and difficulty. But from my perspective, authors still have a great deal of loyalty to the journals that serve their communities best, irrespective of the business model or the publishing model that's available to them at any specific point in time. There are exceptions to that as well. You know, authors who are particularly motivated to always publish open access are going to look one way or another. But certainly there is nothing that suggests to me that the minute one publisher walks in with a TA and another publisher doesn't have one, that there's a move. I don't see that. As
a follow-up, have the institutions themselves and the libraries, etc., once these TAs have been established, have there been particular extra effort made, do you think, on behalf of those libraries to actually coach the authors into?
For some, for sure. I am not sure, and this is by no means denigrating those efforts. I don't know how much authors take librarian recommendations into account either when choosing where to publish. I think they follow what their PIs have done. They follow. Right. I think all those traditional drivers remain in place as the primary considerations for authors. I think maybe arguably where the scale players have an advantage in attracting authors is in marketing and marketing technology, but I don't think it's a function of TAs, and I don't think it's a function of authors choosing to do something different because of the existence of a TA.
I agree entirely. Yes, I haven't seen any evidence that there's a sort of, even in cases where, you know, kind of there hasn't been a, you know, maybe we were just one of a small number of TAs that also all of a sudden flood to us. What I will say, though, that once their journal of choice offers a TA, they love the frictionless open access publishing. I mean, and that is a real. I think that's where you get the loyalty to you know, kind of. I don't really have to do anything. I don't have to worry about charging or making any decision other than literally ticking a box.
Provided they've got to the line.
Yes, So I think that's where the benefit for authors comes in. But I agree with this. I've seen very little evidence that it makes a difference at choice.
I haven't seen any other ones.
I think there are a lot of authors who have no idea what the different business models are. And I think it possibly varies between different disciplines. So our authors are clinicians. They are primarily clinicians. Research, on the whole, is not their primary focus. If they're at a hospital that's connected to a university, they may have access to a transitional agreement. A lot of them have no idea. So we have to do quite a lot of communication, and we've been working with the marketing teams to try and get that message out. And then they're delighted when they hear, as you say. But also, there are lots of institutions that our authors work at where actually those kind of deals are not happening. If they are in hospitals that are not connected through to the normal sort of academic library channels, that those institutions are not, I don't think they're thinking about transitional deals in the same way as the more academic libraries. And so I think it's a slower build, and a lot of our authors still don't have access to funding.
So just as a quick follow-up, how about the expiry of TAs and the whole the renewable based on some author participation? Is that to the floor?
I don't. For the most part, everyone, authors, librarians, are really happy with what TAs do for authors being able to publish.
In principle?
So in principle and in practice, it seriously, as both Sophia and Miriam have said, seriously elevates the proportion of open access publishing, which is what they're designed to do. The transitional or transformative piece is important, and there is a desire to continually progress the nature of these agreements and change them up, and that's typically what renewal discussions consist of. There is rarely a discussion, in my experience, which is, well, nobody wants to take advantage of this. As both Miriam and Sophia have said, authors are absolutely delighted when they have the opportunity to be able to publish in the journals that matter most to them on an open access basis, and that's where librarians are able to deliver a really strong message and story of value to their group of sorry, my mind has gone completely blank. There's a word that I'm looking for, but to their community, right? And that's where the message that librarians can deliver becomes particularly strong. Mm-hmm. But the renewal conversations are always about value for money. They're about what's the next version of this kind of agreement. The uptake of open access in those agreements is enthusiastic. Yeah. So.
Just quickly, because we've got 2 more to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's they've come a long way. How do we do that final mile? If we are moving into a world where we want to transform to full open access, there are a lot of examples of journals that have now, I mean, the Royal Society announced last week a much smaller independent publisher than either Wiley or IOP. They've got 71% of their output as open access, which is amazing. Yep. How do they get that next 29%? I don't know. There's no one here from the Royal Society as far as I'm aware. But I think we see that in other publishers. How are we going to do that final bit? And the bulk agreements for fully open access journals are coming, but they feel a bit more limited, and there's a bit more to think about in that model. Is it just turning it from one type of subscription to another type of subscription? Is that okay? Is that not okay? I think there's still a long way to go. There's still a lot of things to think about.
Thank you. Do you want to touch on that?
I think that's answered that question.
So we're just going to then just change tack because it's come up in your bios, and obviously it's fundamental now, about dealing with research integrity and challenges there's myriad challenges. How those are faced by your respective publishing sort of basis, that dealing with research integrity cases, and I suppose that leads to the final point that we'd like to get before we open to the floor, which is about resources and how, yes, partnering technologically is one solution, but there's always myriad other things that scale or participatory in that big market requires resources. So if we can start with, or mix it as you wish, talk about the research integrity pain points, if you like, just in terms of resources, and then broadly about the resource mix and how you organise yourselves to be responsive. I'll start with Miriam, as she didn't. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really big
well, let's start with research integrity. Yeah.
I'm just going to think about how in a minute also I can sort of say the main thing. So I think research integrity is I would say, the number one challenge for the industry and has been
Yep.
for a little while. I would also say that it may be one of those areas where scale is not necessarily an advantage, where sort of small can be beautiful, and, kind of because smaller subject-specific publishers tend to have subject expertise in their staff more often than the commercial publishers have. So there is a slight advantage there, although there's fraud in publishing is so smart these days that being a nanoscientist doesn't necessarily mean you can spot the fraudulent data. But that's let's not go there. Let's talk about resourcing. Speaking about my own experience, when I started at IOP Publishing in January 2021, so not that long ago, and the research integrity expertise was one person part-time, who sort of, kind of went to COPE meetings and owned kind of policies and sort of decision-making, dealt with the odd case that was escalated up, but on the whole, the sort of making sure that what we publish is, is of a sufficient standard, ethically and in an integrity, from an integrity point of view, was sort of devolved to the editors of the journals. Fast forward to now, we have 7 full-time staff in the research integrity team. So there are people that are trained in research integrity. They deal with the many more cases that get escalated up. They look at policies, education, internally and externally. They assess technology solutions. So this has gone from something that everybody knew a little bit about to being a real specialism that is in addition to the regular editorial team. So the editorial teams have still grown in line with submissions, and then we have more research integrity in the mix. And I don't think there would have been any other way of dealing with what we're seeing in the market and the disruption that integrity concerns.
And 2 years ago, the issues were still there 2 years ago, but they were just not coming to the press, or...
I would say 5 or 6 years ago, I knew what a paper mill was. I had experienced one it was a subscription journal at the time, but it seemed like something that was pretty unusual and pretty rare to kind of come to a reputable publisher as I was at Wiley at the time. That has totally changed. There's this kind of an industry in itself growing up.
Yep.
Every week the team, the peer review team at IOP Publishing rejects about 15 to 20% of submissions because of ethical concerns. That's a normal week. This year we've had one pretty serious, what we call it a paper mill attack, so basically getting flooded with papers. Yeah. That can then go up. In some journals, that then goes up temporarily to 50% of all submissions you get for that journal come from unpublishable manuscripts. So I don't quite know. We could have a whole conversation about what's driven
it's
it.
It's eating up resources.
It's eating up resources, and it's growing.
Yeah.
It's not getting. You guys might have a different view, but my sense is it's not going away.
No.
At all.
Sophia.
So this is one
Small
area.
is beautiful.
Yeah, but it is useful to tap into the larger resources with our partner, and the advice that we can get if we see something and think it's a bit odd. Then there are others who are more experienced. But there are other places to get advice. COPE is an international is a cross-publisher organisation with all the advice that I'm sure we've all used multiple times in this room. But there are other places that small publishers can get advice. So you mentioned it briefly earlier, the Society Publishers Coalition. We're a group of, I think there's about 144 members now, so we're all society, not-for-profit publishers. And we have the best example of an online forum that I have ever experienced. You can ask questions, that's
a big boast.
Yeah. It's great.
It is. I totally think that's a really active community and incredibly supportive.
And there are some subgroups within that. So there is a research integrity subgroup, and so that group meets online a few times a year. discussing different things that we've seen, sharing best practice, sharing ideas. So that's a really nice resource. But it's not just about research integrity. It's a fabulous opportunity for us to share with others who are in the same boat as us. There might be 1 to 100, 500 staff, but we're all not-for-profit publishers. And we can ask questions, share advice, and also it can help amplify our voices rather than just being single societies giving responses to...
and solely in a service arrangement as well with the...
Exactly, and there's at least one example where we have jointly negotiated a group deal for a service with a reduction. So it's a really important channel for us.
Great. Liz, if you can be brief.
Yes, resources. We have about 40 people working in research integrity, a small number of whom, fewer than 5, are in strategy and policy and external engagement. The remainder of that group is in what we call investigations and assurance, which is investigations at any point from submission through to multiple years post-publication. We are developing our own electronic editorial office infrastructure, so submission and peer review. We've got it live on several hundred journals at the moment. That has currently 23 or 24 different research integrity checks and workflows and processes and tools embedded in it. That piece of infrastructure has a team of over 100 people working on it full-time at the moment. This is, without doubt, the biggest challenge still facing the industry. We've got a lot of experience in it, learned the hard way. And Miriam's already mentioned the STM Integrity Hub, which I think it would be remiss not to mention again. This is a really important piece of cross-publisher infrastructure. The paper mill that Miriam might experience one week popping up, delivering 50% of unacceptable submissions in her journal, when she closes it down, it's going to appear somewhere else. And even as a large publisher with scale who can develop this infrastructure and invest in it and so on, we don't know what we don't know until we see it. And if we get an early warning signal because things are popping up at other publishers, that's just helpful to ensuring the entire ecosystem, which includes the very smallest of publishers right through to the very biggest.
Great, thank you. So we're going to open up to you guys. I think we've covered collaboration, we've covered the small, medium, and in partnership models. We've covered open access. We've covered industry bodies and the importance that they play. I think a lot of those things are familiar to us, but it's important that we bring that together under this in this forum. And any gambit of those points, please feel free.
Hi, everybody. My name's Alicia Wise, and thank you. This has been really brilliant to see a clear, focused perspective from university presses and publishing partners come through. I'm really struck, though, with the disconnect. Having recently been at funder and library-oriented conferences on the same topic, the focus there is on diamond open access and open publishing platforms, open infrastructures, like Open Research Europe. And there seems to be a visceral rejection of transformative agreements underway. I'd really appreciate knowing how you all are thinking about that. Thanks.
That's a great question.
I think that ties in a little bit, Alicia, with the comment I made about the conversations around transformative agreements are about value for money and the what comes next. And that is a major topic of conversation. I am yet to see Diamond really work at scale. That doesn't mean I'm opposed to it, and we have some Diamond journals ourselves, but I'm not yet seeing it work at scale. And the open research platforms are really interesting, but again, I'm not seeing authors go there yet. That author behavior, I think, irrespective of the model, is still very allied to this kind of sense of community that Sophia referenced earlier. As an academic, the journals that have nurtured your community and published the most important, which doesn't necessarily mean the most impactful, but the most long-lived content in your discipline. So I think this is why I think we're in for a period of really substantial change again, but I can't put my finger on where it's going to go just yet.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say I would agree with that. I think there is going to be change. I think the classic TA, if that's what we want to call, will probably not exist in the future. And we talk about it and think about it, but the disconnect I also see is between those discussions you're referencing, Alicia, that are, kind of fund as very senior librarians, and the librarians the IOP publishing sales team usually talks to. So, in charge of the physics library, they probably kind of have a sense that, kind of there may be something different or better out there, but right now they think a TA really works for them on, kind of those that have bought into it. So I think we need to be careful about not rushing into something that actually then doesn't work for the end users. And I think there's a little bit of a risk there. That's not to say that I don't think other models have merit. I mean, like Liz said, Diamond Open Access, not sure we have some. I share the concern about sustainability. But I think if we're learning one thing at the moment is that we have to be sort of agile and respond to what our external stakeholders need, rather than going in with a sort of a model that we think is the right model and hope everybody will agree.
Do you want to come in?
Very quickly, we absolutely couldn't afford to be Diamond, but there would have to be other funding models, and I have no idea what they could be.
I would comment also that I think that nothing ever seems to disappear entirely. We just keep adding models, right? And so it'll be a case of a continued mix, and the management of that mix probably affects scale and the ability to prioritise some of the models that are out there, and maybe some of the big players having gone in hard and capitalised on that. It possibly helps everybody else to understand some of these newer models in those moments.
But I think one thing you said was, I really want to emphasize, is that we still sell read licenses successfully. I mean, okay, individual subscriptions maybe not so much, but kind of what has happened over the last 10 years is that more models have appeared. It's not like, and the old models in some regions and some markets have persisted. So it's not it is truly a transition, and maybe it will be in transition for...
Cassette tapes are back, after all.
Yep.
Anyone else?
There's a question in the front here.
Thanks. I'm Patrick from Dainter. Thanks again for the panel. Tom, at the start, you mentioned margin. Where's the margin, I think you were saying. And I guess this is a question for Sophia. There was an article last year published by Johnston and Malcolmson which talked about, there was a study of learned societies, and said that when they partner with big publishers, they saw a decline in revenue. And I think the article was called something like, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And I just wondered if either you or the room could comment on that.
I haven't read that specific article. I think there is more and more pressure on revenues, and we have seen our revenues go down consistently the last few years. Not as steeply as we had feared, but they have been going down. This last year, we've seen a much bigger growth in open access and the revenues associated with it. And actually, that has started to fill the gap. And I think that will hopefully help to lower the decrease that we've seen. And the projections are for it to stabilise over the next few years. I do think it's interesting, though, there was also some research by Rob Johnson about, he looked at the number of learned societies that have been independently published and then have moved to being partner published, and seeing what the landscape has changed. And more and more have been moving to being partnered, and I don't know, not necessarily a good thing for independence. And I think a lot of that has been driven by the fear of Plan S and the the deadlines imposed by some organisations for moves to open access. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who's going to deny that open access is a bad thing. It's what we're all aiming for. And that is one of the fundamentals of the Society Publishers Coalition. We are all on a journey moving towards open access. That is what we are trying to do, we are achieving. We're not there trying to hang on to subscriptions, but it does become very difficult to do it on your own when you're small. And with the increase in models, it just becomes more and more complex. So when there were fewer models, there were some small publishers who were able to survive on their own independently. And actually, it's an unintended consequence of this drive to fully open access, which we all want to do, but it's difficult to do that alone. And there are going to be more partnerships, and actually margins are being pulled here and there, everywhere. More and more infrastructure and complex things are being required by the community and demanded by the community. And that's right, that's how it should be. But the money's got to come from somewhere, or not.
Just add 30 seconds to that. I recognise everything that you've just said. I think there is a certain fear dynamic in terms of organisations that have been historically self-publishing choosing to partner. There's also an increasing recognition, I think, that this environment we're in with very rapidly changing technology needs as well is part of that drive, that it's difficult sometimes for smaller publishers to be able to invest, which is why things, again, like the STM Integrity Hub can be so useful, because it's developed by the whole publishing infrastructure. What I would say is, from the perspective of a publisher that partners with many independent organizations, every time an organisation like Sophia's chooses to go out to tender or something comes in, the competition is fierce, and the financial offers to societies are one of the biggest sources of competition out there, because every major publisher recognises that organisations like Sophia's have fantastic reach into their communities, and it's unparalleled. And that matters a huge deal.
And it's probably worth stating that if you're a small or medium-sized publisher who looks for partners, you lose out those deals because the safety and security of a larger publisher is often perceived as more valuable, just to make that comment. So we're going to draw to a close there. Appreciate your points, everybody, but I think this is about collaboration in a world where technology and all business models that are out there are covered is very hard to do when you're small. So partnership is going to be fundamental, however you do that, whether it's with other societies, whether it's with a big commercial publisher, which I think are less and less scary now, because the exposure to the forces from research integrity through technology investments, and even collaboration with with the consultants that are out there now, they understand our use cases much better. So I think we're in a place that's more informed, at least. And so obviously the industry bodies that have been mentioned are increasingly crucial, and that is trust and collaboration at the fore. So thank you so much.